Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to The History of Horror Cinema, a personal podcast journey through the good, bad, and ugly of the history of horror movies, based on my blog, The History of Horror Cinema. Oh, and please don't forget to hit subscribe. Oliver VII, 1934. In 1934, Laurel and Hardy released their second comedy short to cash in on the horror boom. Here, a much more chillingly full-blooded vehicle than the theatrical whodunit of the Laurel Hardy murder case. This was largely due to the gloriously terrifying presence of Mae Bush, whose previous roles for them as various harsh, domineering wives, dangerous criminal magnates, and bunny-boiling jilted exes surely inspired Stan to craft something to take her intimidating persona to an even more concentrated level, whilst still retaining some sex appeal. Mae Bush was Australian by birth, the child of travelling vaudeville performers. According to Simon Lewish's biography, in her early days at Mack Sennett's Keystone Studio, home of those klutzy cops, she was the third party who ended Sennett's relationship with his star Mabel Normand, a romance celebrated in the musical Mack and Mabel. After a solid career in film, working with the likes of Erich von Stroheim in Foolish Wives, and Lon Chaney as his gangster's mole with heart in The Unholy Three, she very nearly became a casualty of the studio system when she left her contract with MGM and suffered a nervous breakdown. Long before John Travolta, she disproved F. Scott Fitzgerald's notion that there are no second acts in American lives. Thanks to Hal Roach offering her the short Love 'Em and Weep, it introduced her to the two gentlemen in bowler hats who would make her famous. Across 13 films, her strength of character would be compressed between Laurel and Hardy's meddling bouts of cowardice to forge a diamond of unforgettable hard-knock quality. Actually, we are lucky that Oliver VIII ever saw the light of day. In the middle of filming in December 1933, Stan had to suspend filming when he heard the awful news of the death of his brother Teddy Jefferson, who had been under laughing gas, nitrous oxide anesthetic in a dentist's chair in Los Angeles, and suffered a fatal heart attack. As we've already said, leaving aside any fanciful Omen-style speculation about the freakish coincidence of the boys' horror shorts both linking to real-life tragedies for Stan, the only disturbing echo is that the plot of Oliver VIII is generated by a nightmare of Ollie's whilst napping in a chair at his barber shop. The plot is in many ways reminiscent of their previous genre outing. The setup here is that on a break in their shop, this time it is Stan who reads out the Catalyst newspaper ad. Wealthy young widow with large fortune wishes to communicate with congenial young man. Object: matrimony. This again shows a charming innocence of publicity. What man wouldn't appear congenial under those circumstances? Stan has a rare burst of pragmatic initiative, pointing out that, in a marriage of obvious convenience, he would use some of the money to simply get the expected old crab, as Ollie calls her, a facelift, and then live the high life without having to work anymore. Such is his uncharacteristic smarts that Ollie changes his mind, and they shake on agreeing to it, as a gentleman's competition. Ollie, however, uses his far more reliable cunning and hides Stan's reply letter. He sits back and allows Stan to shave him. We then meet the ringleted Bush as she knifes open the mail. Not the last time we'll see her skill with that implement. She looks at an amusing photo of Ollie where he's posturing the upward-tilted glamour gaze of the matinee idol, but his eyes express more a vague distaste at hearing flatulence from an upstairs window. She is in cahoots with her bushy-browed butler Jitters, Jack Barty, one of the most memorable, insane supporting performances in the Laurel and Hardy canon. Together, they prepare to entertain another in the list of Olivers she has vowed to wipe out since the first of that name jilted her at the altar. Jitters savors the familiar outcome. Strange that on the eve of every wedding, you walk in your sleep, and every morning a body is found, with its throat cut. Oliver VIII awaits her cold steel. Back in the duo's barbershop, there's a nice understated verbal gag from the returning Stan. He's just been out to get a shave. In fact, all of Stan's early scenes do have an unusually muted quality, eschewing his usual gag rate in favor of allowing Ollie to drive the comedy and energy. This may have been connected with adjusting to his off-screen tragedy, unless he filmed them in sequence. Ollie is cheerfully packing for his prospective bride, delusions of grandeur already convincing him that he cannot associate with Stan anymore. "I'm sorry, but my social position won't permit it," he announces loftily before leaving. Once at Mrs. Fox's mansion, Ollie is ushered in by Jitters, who hilariously discards his hat and coat before summoning the lady. This scene is a macabre joy, as the butler shows he is crazy, both in his playing of invisible cards and his small talk, in the famous exchange, "Nice weather we had tomorrow." "It certainly Oliver double takes, realizing he is in the midst of a cuckoo while he waits for his lovebird. Inevitably, Stan arrives, having rumbled Ollie's deception and demanding a half share. He has been busy demonstrating the kind of shrewd negotiation that makes Jack of the Beanstalk fame look like Warren Buffett, having sold the barbershop business for a gold brick, a patently obvious sprayed standard one, and a handful of nuts. Upon meeting Hardy at last, Bush sees Stan and remarks with humorless bluntness, "What is that?" Stan shows he is on the same sublimely surreal wavelength as Jitters, while Bush alternates between a warm and snaring seductiveness and her own brand of unapologetic insanity, snipping off Ollie's tie with no explanation and then providing a meal served by Jitters where they mime a total absence of any food. The entertaining daffiness then begins to turn to chills and goosebumps. Such is the total conviction of Fox and her servant in their planned murder that the butler lets the boys in on it just to watch their scared response, before Mrs. Fox bids them not good night, but goodbye, with the mocking terminal hospitality of, "I hope you have a nice, long sleep." Jitters' bugling of the last post is a deliciously madcap nightcap to send them to their final resting place. There is still room for situation comedy laughs once Laurel and Hardy are in their room, yet you can feel the clock ticking to their doom effectively, the tension building as they desperately try to survive the night. Stan doesn't quite understand the concept of keeping a waking watch. "I was dreaming I was awake, and then I woke up and found myself asleep," accidentally almost blows his friend's foot off, and Ollie's makeshift alarm brick clonks himself into unconsciousness. This creates the most pleasurable horror frisson climax, as a panicky Stan whimpers that he can't wake Oliver up, while we intercut with Bush sharpening her knife inexorably on her way to their room. For my money, these alarming shots of her deserve to be as iconic in horror film montages as Leatherface waving his chainsaw in vain. This time, the get-out clause that the terror was all a dream is triggered with more conviction and impact than the Laurel Hardy murder case. The sound of Stan's clumsiness wakes Ollie in shock just as Bush's nightmare knife touches his tender throat. It's a payoff that works well and diffuses the threat level ably cranked up by director Lloyd French. Following Oliver VIII, Laurel and Hardy continued to release 6 more successful shorts, Bush getting them into trouble in 5 of them, understandably never seeking to blend laughs with scares so deliberately again. Fortunately, their feature film projects would find plenty more genres and scenarios to keep them busy. The Live Ghost, 1934. By 1934, Laurel and Hardy were coming to the end of their hugely popular run of short films, and were about to branch out into long-form features. The Live Ghost, released that December, showcased a number of the much-loved repertory company of supporting actors they'd built up over the years, in a fun farce of mistaken ghostly identity. Directed by fellow Brit, Birmingham's Charles Rogers, it first allows us to enjoy Walter Long, one of their arch-enemies, as a fearsome sea captain whose vessel has an even worse reputation for being haunted. Long always played the tough, grizzled villain, belying his real-life warmth, and had come to Hal Roach Studios via film roles for D.W. Griffith, notoriously as Gus, an African-American, if you can believe it, bad guy in The Ill-Conceived Birth of a Nation in 1915, the Musketeer of the Slums in 1916's Intolerance, and 3 of Rudolph Valentino's brief run of box-office hits. Stan and Ollie are idly fishing on the dockside when Long offers them crewing on his ship. Wisely, they demur, although not from fear of him, but of sharks, Stan hearing that the sea is infatuated with them, and Oliver correcting him that the correct term is infuriated. Numbskull heads prevail, and they agree to Long instead paying them $1 a head to Shanghai other sailors from the local dive. This becomes a passport to the bar scenes where Stan places bets with gullible sea dogs that an egg can't be held in the mouth without breaking it. The resulting swallow caused by a fist to the chin gets him chased out to a waiting frying-pan bop from Ollie. One of the wilier pub denizens is another welcome face, Charlie Hall, a slightly awkward performer, but a vivid opposing force for them as various cuckolded husbands, an exasperated ice cream parlor employer, and then his eye-for-an-eye vengeful business competitor in the following month's famous tit-for-tat. Here he gets the better of Ollie when he switches con artist places with Stan, causing all three, plus Long, to get hit outside. The nitwit pair awake to find themselves equally press-ganged on board ship amongst some understandably bitter new workmates, and the captain's threat to turn any crew member's head 180 degrees if they utter the word ghost again. None of this phases the marvelously sozzled Arthur Houseman, Hollywood's go-to for comic drunk parts. He manages to be just sober enough to fool Stan and Ollie, threatened by Long into babysitting him, into thinking he's abed while he tops up his alcohol stream on shore. A fall into a vat of paint gives Houseman a full-body white spectral appearance, which cues up ghostly chills for Laurel and Hardy back on board. Meanwhile, there's a disappointingly brief two-scene cameo from Mae Bush, whose hard-bitten, sassy persona almost makes a perfect match for Long, were it not for an unexpected reunion with her husband in the form of Houseman. The pleasurable chills are rounded off by Long making good on his threat when the boys excuse their incompetence. As Laurel and Hardy retire to bed with their heads facing the opposite way to their nightshirts, so must we from their delightful company, making way for other notable comedy teams of the pre-war period to do their best in picking up the baton of comic horror.